Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Tonight's broadcast is brought to you by Nature Box, shipping great tasting and wholesome snacks right to your door. Forget the vending machine and snack smarter with wholesome, delicious treats like toasted cheddar sticks and much more. Support this show and order a free Nature Box sampler box so you can try them out at naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. It's a very sad week for a great many of us with the passing of Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock, who died on Friday at the age of 83 years old. I guess he had COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. He'd been a smoker decades ago and had quit smoking decades ago, I guess, but the damage to his lungs had already been done, and he sort of knew this day would come, but he'd had a rich life of 83 years. I was very moved by what George Takei put online just a couple of days ago. He said to Leonard, "We return you now to the stars, Leonard. You taught us to live long and prosper, and you indeed did, friend." Kind of troubling that William Shatner couldn't make the funeral. I thought that was kind of sad. I mean, these two guys, William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, sort of irrevocably linked thanks to the Star Trek phenomenon. I've heard Shatner's, I'm a William Shatner fan. I always have been. He will always be the captain of the Enterprise, I've heard he can be kind of a dick. You see how wonderful he is with people, and you see how much people love him and how much amazing stuff he's done. But then you will see and hear instances where he has been less than generous to someone, or he's just been kind of a douche, And a great example of that was when I was watching the George Takei documentary, To Be Takei. And he was getting married when they legalized gay marriage in California. And Shatner didn't go to the wedding, and they asked him why not. And he said, well, George and I aren't really friends, as I recall. I think that's what he said. I don't really know him, something along those lines. And I'm thinking to myself, you don't know George Takei? Sulu on the Enterprise, you don't know him? It just didn't wash. It just seemed like such an insensitive thing to say. Even find another way to phrase it if you don't want to go. But, I don't really know the guy. Just seems sort of, unfortunately, characteristic of what William Shatner can be like. And yet I still love the guy. I still love William Shatner. He will always be that iconic figure. And the day he passes will be a very dark day in this house as well. All black will be worn. He's William Shatner, of course. But we mourn the loss of Nimoy, but we celebrate a rich life that impacted millions of people all around the world. If I may segue from some bad news to some good news, I just got a message in from Blog Talk Radio's higher-ups that said that the Thinking Atheist Radio podcast, the show that you are listening to right now, has been nominated at the 10th Annual Podcast Awards, which will be held in Las Vegas, Nevada on the 14th of April of this year. And somehow we got nominated under religion inspiration. So we are nominated for a podcast award under religion inspiration. Other nominations in the category, I just went to the website at podcastawards.com because I was curious. In the same category, The Scathing Atheist, The Book of Mormon, The Sci-Fi Christian, and get this, Paula White's Hope for Today. So I guess I'm in good company. I don't know. The award ceremony, April the 14th. No, I'm not going to Vegas. It's tempting to say we should go, but there's just too much travel going on. Apparently, one of the keynotes is going to be Adam Carolla, who has the record for the most downloaded podcast in the world. He's going to be one of the keynotes at the award ceremony. So we're nominated, my friends. We're on the list. And good luck to us all. Tonight's broadcast covers a subject I have long been curious about, the Unitarians. And we'll hear from members of the thinking atheist community who are involved or have been involved in the Unitarian church and culture. And I have on the radio tonight a conversation with a couple of Unitarian ministers. So we'll find out what it's like to give do you call it a sermon from the Unitarian platform? We'll find out firsthand. That's coming up in just a second. Before we do that, though, I would like to introduce you to Sticks and Stones. A delectable combination of almonds, cashews, sesame sticks, and wheat. I'd like to introduce you to the peanut butter nom nom, which is like a soft peanut butter cookie that's made with rolled oats and almonds and, of course, peanut butter. And each cookie only has 5 grams of sugar. The South Pacific plantain, crispy, loaded with flavor, lightly dusted in sea salt, and a terrific alternative to potato chips. The toffee almond granola made of rolled oats and almonds with a fruity sweetness of dried bananas. These are the kinds of healthy, nutritionist-approved snacks that NatureBox would like to ship right to your door. These and over 100 other options. They have nixed the artificial flavors, colors, and sweeteners, no trans fats, no high fructose corn syrup, and I'm getting a lot of positive reviews from people in our audience who are looking for a healthy snack alternative and a way to support this show. So right now you can get a free trial box that features 5 of their most popular snacks, and that first trial box is free, so give them a shot. Log on to naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. naturebox.com/thinkingatheist. We're going to get into the Unitarians, their origins, the definition of what a Unitarian was and is, and we'll speak to our special guest. We'll hear from you and get your perspective. And if you will indulge me, I'm going to finish the show with kind of my own take on the UU church and culture. But first, let's read an email I got from Dave, and he said this. I've been an atheist agnostic UU since the early 90s. It's a cause I can believe in. I was amazed in a religion that didn't require me to believe anything more than simple humanist values, after running with prejudice from my Christian Science upbringing. We all look at wonder at a childbirth, or some of us the night sky. We don't have to believe in a deity to have an emotional reaction, reverence for some things. We can acknowledge and appreciate that sense of wonder and reverence and even give thanks, not to any god necessarily, but perhaps to our fortune at being in the place we are. We feel a sense of privilege to have what we have and be where we are without resorting to deities. You don't have to believe in a god to support justice, fairness, egalitarianism, and general humanity. It's also interesting to me to be exposed to other religions, not as this is the truth, which is irritating, but instead as this is what some people believe. UU presents various religions as sources for ideas, slightly more than academic study. For example, who can't benefit from Lent, where you give up something of value for a time to strike out against materialism? Or Rosh Hashanah, where you sit down for a day and consider your life, as it's been, as it is, and what direction you want for it. Or so many ideas from Buddhism or Islam. UU gives me those things, and also an opportunity to sing in public, and social action in the areas of immigration justice, environment, and justice for the poor and challenged. Claire on Facebook said, my sister-in-law attended a UU Christmas service because her brother is the organist at the church. The celebrant said that it wasn't the star that guided the wise men to the manger, because they were really wise women, and their ovaries were pulling them to Mary's maternal life force. My sister-in-law had to leave the church to stand outside, howling with laughter. Mikey said, I'm an atheist and I've been a UU member for 7 years. I go there because of the community and the lack of dogma. It's like church, but without all the God stuff. The sermons are generally grounded in reality and often offer thinking that I find useful in daily life. Yes, sometimes I'll have to sit through something pagan or New Age, but it's not presented in a thou shalt do this way. And I'm genuinely interested in hearing others' beliefs, no matter how nutty it may be to my viewpoint. And yes, they are very left-leaning, whereas I'm more middle of the road, but it's presented in a way I can either take or leave. And yes, they ask for money. Each UU church is self-sufficient. There is no governing UU body that helps fund each church. The only money they get is what its members fork over, and as is the case with our church, that's just barely enough to pay the bills. JJ said, I attended a UU church for the better part of a summer before realizing it was little more than a weekly DNC rally, the Democratic National Convention rally, interspersed with choral folk songs. Tim said, my wife and I attended our local UU church for a year or so. Very nice people and great local charity outreach. But yeah, I felt that in an effort to be all-inclusive, they didn't really stand for anything. The whole experience left me yearning for an active, outright secular meetup group that embraced non-belief. It was all a bit too church-like for me, even though there was never any mention of anything supernatural. For fans of the TV show Community, I'd say UU is similar to the school's generic, uber-inoffensive mascot, the human being. Elisa said, they can be as dogmatic as any Christian church I've attended. If you don't accept something, like their environmental dogma, you're not welcome. However, UUs are usually much more woo-tastic than Christian churches. How do you keep a straight face when someone's prattling on about crystal energy? And Ed said, I attended a UU service at the invitation of an atheist friend and actually enjoyed it. The, quote, sermon by a UU pastor, who I understand is an atheist himself, was interesting and informative, while still having a bit of inspiration to it, and no God talk whatsoever. We'll get into the history and some specifics of the Unitarian Church in just a second, but first, I'd like to speak to Reverend David Breeden. Dr. Breeden began his service as senior minister at the First Unitarian Society in August of 2013. He's a published poet and author. He is a social activist, and he has committed himself in his efforts to fostering and promoting humanism within the Unitarian Universalist tradition. He joins me on the radio tonight. Dr. Breeden, great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
What is your role?
I am the senior minister at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis, Minnesota. First Unitarian Society was the place where John Dietrich invented religious humanism within the Unitarian movement back in about 1915.
Do Unitarians have a philosophy or creed or religious belief?
That is a difficult question. Now, the thing is that Unitarianism developed out of the belief that creed was a bad idea because revelation is ongoing. And that was a movement in Massachusetts among what had once been the Puritans. Here in the U.S., that's Unitarianism anyway. And so what happened is that Unitarianism developed as a congregational-based organization. So you've got wildly different theologies in different congregations. The congregation where I minister has been humanist. The majority of people have stayed humanist since 1915 through the years, and that's the basic theology of the place, theology or post-theology, if you will. Other, especially East Coast Unitarian congregations, many of them are Christian in some way, shape, or form, and then you've got everything in between. Then you also have the fact that in 1961, the Universalists and the Unitarians joined together. There were humanist Universalists before that combination as well. So it gets very complicated after a point.
Well, you understand how Many of us look at the word humanist and theology and think, do those two words jive together? How would you address that?
I call myself a post-theologian, and because I just don't think that any sort of divinity figures into any kind of thinking that I do. So post is good with me. I think that the latest research just came out from Barna Group saying that 48% of people under the age of 30 are post-Christian. So, we've got post-Christian, we have secular Jews, we have people leaving all religious traditions behind. So I think a post-Christian, post-theological framework is probably the best place to be.
David, did you start out as more of a fundamentalist?
I was born into the Pentecostal tradition. My parents were working class, and I grew up a holy roller.
Was it a Pentecostal church in Minnesota?
No, I grew up in the South. So I went to Pentecostal churches in Mississippi and Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, Indiana, Illinois, etc.
May I ask you about your own journey? I mean, was there a moment of epiphany where you thought, well, some of this may not jive with the facts, or was it sort of a longer road?
It was a longer road for me. I began to read the Bible. That's one of the things that is encouraged among Pentecostal youth. And so I started reading the King James Version of the Bible back when I was probably 10, 11 years old. Read the whole darn thing. I can't say I comprehended all those lists and begats and all, but I did read it, and my youthful determination was that what I was seeing in print was not what I was hearing from the pulpit and experiencing in the church where I went. So I began to question that. And as soon as I left home, which was right after high school, I started going to a Unitarian Universalist, a humanist small group.
Does that sort of scratch a church itch, for lack of a better way of saying it? I mean, you enjoy the format of a church service. You enjoy the sermon, and I don't know if you sing hymns and have that kind of structure. Is that attractive to you?
Well, yes. I think that some of us still have, I suppose, what you could call the Sunday morning itch or the church itch that needed to be scratched. That's certainly the way I was raised. But at my congregation, we try to remove all Christian language completely, so we don't have a sermon. We have a talk. We don't have a sanctuary. We have an assembly hall. We don't have a service. We have an assembly. We don't sing hymns. We sing songs. Once in a while, God will appear in one of those, but we kind of considered an antique and an interesting thing and go on with our singing. So,
what kind of songs do you sing?
Well, we have the hymnal that is part of the Unitarian Universalist tradition, but we pick and choose in such a way that we don't refer to any sort of supernaturalism, except once in a while accidentally, or if it's such a grand old song that we just can't bear not to sing it. But we don't do it in a worshipful manner, shall we say?
So it's a sort of a non-hymnal hymnal, then.
We do not call it a hymnal. We call it a songbook. Again, it's we are on the far fringes of humanist practice within Unitarian Universalism, but we like it there.
How do you approach sermon preparation? What kind of things do you talk about from the stage platform or pulpit?
Well, yes. The podium and the stage, yes. What I talk about from week to week are ethical, moral issues. I talk about what's going on in politics and American society and try to make some sense out of those. I try not to do much religion bashing because, again, from a post-theological viewpoint, there's not a particular reason to attack religion. I think it's going away under its own power quickly enough and doesn't need to be kicked out the door. So generally speaking, there's no reference to any kind of religious thought whatsoever. I really depend upon poetry and philosophy much more than I do, or almost exclusively, actually, and scripture only occurs very, very seldom.
How do you approach criticism about sort of the inclusiveness of the Unitarians?
Well, I'm as honest as I can be about what I think about various religious traditions. Again, I try not to bash them, and by remaining Unitarian Universalist, my humanist congregation has said that we are tolerant of diverse religious thinking. That said, most of us approach religion as an older interpretive tradition that doesn't have all that much validity. I mean, yes, religions do have truth embedded in them, but that truth is probably better understood from a scientific, philosophical viewpoint nowadays.
I'm sitting here digesting this and listening to what a service is, and I understand community. I certainly understand structure and traditions and even being able to emulate some of the things that churches have done successfully that human beings enjoy. But if you have a congregation and there's an atheist next to a Christian, next to a Muslim, next to a guy who thinks that we faked the moon landing, or whatever, if you've got this large tent and everybody is coming, how does one approach the idea of evidence, facts, or truth without getting into debunking what has been sort of disproven out there? Do you find that's a challenge for you as a sort of a minister or someone who speaks from the stage?
I don't, because I approach these things from my own truth, which is science-based and reason-based. And so as I see it, and I hope people do there, that I'm speaking my truth as best I can see it. And I hope that they trust me. The 9/11 truthers and all of that, what I find so interesting about those folks is that they wish the world were more rational really than it is in some ways. I mean, human action were more rational than it actually is. And it's a fear of chaos, I think. It's there used to be conspiracy theories about Pearl Harbor, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. People want things to make considerably more sense than they actually do. I would equate the God concept in that the same category as wishing that things made more sense than the evidence indicates that it does.
David, do you guys evangelize isn't the word? Do you have outreach? Do you go and find people and welcome them to visit and or join your church?
We reach out. We have our social media presence, and I belong to interfaith groups. I belong to a downtown senior clergy group that includes imams and rabbis and evangelical Christians and mainline Christians. And we have public debates, and we are all very honest about what we believe in, but we're also very honest about the fact that we believe in listening respectfully to others. And I think that that's probably the best outreach of all. I'm heavily involved in social justice issues in the Twin Cities, so I meet up with a lot of people out there, and I hope that my evangelism is in my feet, voting out there on the street and getting out and doing what I can to improve our society. So.
A humanist evangelist, an evangelist for science. Is that how you'd frame it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I do a weekly blog post. There is a UU bloggers group. I'm Mr. Thursday, and my blog posts are always from a humanist viewpoint. I carry the banner for humanism within Unitarian Universalism, where we do have a diversity of belief systems. I frankly think that humanism is the current for tomorrow for people who stop believing or begin to doubt, and for those who begin to think that, yes, I doubt, but maybe I don't want to just read the New York Times on Sunday morning. Maybe I want to get out and meet up with other people, think these things through, have some respect for others, and work with them and figure out how to get along in the world.
Well, David, if you were to welcome me on a Sunday or whatever day it is that you meet, how would you frame it? Let's say we just met on the street. Give me the hard or soft sell.
Well, come on by and see what you think. We do some very, very good music. We have always social action issues and opportunities for putting your belief systems into action to make a better world. And I hope that the talk that you hear will be in some way a how-to in terms of how to live a ethical and moral life and find meaning and purpose in the here and now.
David, thank you so much for sharing your perspective as a minister, someone who takes the platform and has a group, a community in the UU church and culture, and we certainly appreciate your perspective tonight.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Okay, who are the Unitarians? What are the Unitarians? Well, actually, the story of the Unitarians involves two separate groups. The Unitarians were originally Christians who simply rejected the idea of the Holy Trinity. They didn't believe in the Father, Son, Holy Ghost version of God. They embraced the, quote, unity, the single aspect of God. Hence, that's why they are Unitarians. In the early years, the Unitarians stressed rational thinking, the humanity of Christ, and every person's individual and direct relationship with God. It was a very personal kind of thing. The religious group of Universalists didn't really begin to materialize and organize until the 1500s in Transylvania, of all places, and in England in the 1600s. And the fundamentalist churches of that time period were often really hard on the Unitarians, right? The fundamentalists are saying that the Unitarians have got it wrong and they've watered it down and it's deception and whatnot. And many Unitarians were branded as heretics and persecuted as heretics. In the year 1825, the American Unitarian Association was formed. And that association addressed issues like education reform, the abolition of slavery, peace, prison reform, capital punishment, helping poor people, and supporting human rights. Unitarianism would sort of ebb and flow and stretch over the decades. It dabbled for a while in transcendentalist teachings in the mid-1800s. It dealt with issues of violence and conflict during the American Civil War and the subsequent two world wars, and it saw an influx of humanism in the early 1930s. That was Unitarianism. The Universalists were Christians who believed in the concept of eternal salvation. They did not believe in hell. After all, what genuinely loving God would ever invent or implement a place like hell? Universalism dates back to 200 CE. Didn't become a widespread religious movement until English Universalists came to America in the late 1700s, because they, just like the Unitarians, were facing some religious persecution from the fundamentalists. The Universalist coda was love and inclusion, you're welcome, come as you are, that kind of thing. And that atmosphere and that message became really popular here in the United States. The Universalist Church of America was formed in 1793. They supported education and non-sectarian schooling. And they spoke about the same human rights issues that the Unitarians were talking about. And again, they were kind of a refreshing antidote to all the churches out there preaching hellfire and damnation. In the year 1863, it was the Universalists who were the first group in the U.S. to ordain a woman to a church with full denomination authority. But the Civil War was pretty hard on the Universalists. Many of the church buildings were destroyed during the war, and many Universalist ministers went in to become Civil War chaplains and were killed. Plus, there was a softer tone during that time period among the more quote-unquote fundamentalist churches. There was a little less hellfire, a little less damnation going on in all of the non-Universalist churches out there, and so the Universalists became a tad less unique. Membership began to wane. They just weren't a healthy organization. But as Unitarianism and Universalism were sort of close, theologically, sharing a whole lot of the same values, they consolidated. They joined forces in 1961, and they formed the new, quote, religion of Unitarian Universalism. Unitarian Universalism seeks to have a strong voice for social justice issues. Many people in the UU Church participated in the civil rights marches of the 1960s, including Martin Luther King Jr.'s Voting Rights March in Selma, Alabama in 1965. In the 1970s, Unitarian Universalists notably voiced support for gays and lesbians. They spoke out against racism, and they were strong supporters of equal rights for women. In 2001, Unitarian Universalism actually had more female ministers than male ones, and the UU Church continues to encourage female leadership in its roles. Adopted in 1960, the full principles, purposes, and sources of the UU Church can be found in the article on the Unitarian Universalist Association, and I'll just read the principles here. They say this: we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience, and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. The goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. They have the 6 sources. Unitarian Universalists place emphasis on spiritual growth and development, and the official statement of UU Principles describes these 6 sources on which the current practice is based. Here they are. Direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. Words and deeds of prophetic women and men, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. And finally, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. The most common symbol of Unitarian Universalism is the flaming chalice, which is often framed by 2 overlapping rings that many people interpret as representing Unitarianism and Universalism, right? The 2 rings have joined together. The symbol has no official interpretation. This is just what some people say. The chalice itself has long been a symbol of liberal religion, and indeed liberal Christianity. In fact, the disciples of Christ use a chalice as their denomination symbol. The flaming chalice was initially the logo of the Unitarian Service Committee during the Second World War. It was created by an Austrian artist, Hans Deutsch, inspired by, quote, the kind of chalice which the Greeks and Romans put on their altars, the holy oil burning in it, as a symbol of helpfulness and sacrifice. The lack of formal creed has been a cause for criticism among some who argue that Unitarian Universalism is thus without religious content. Over the years, there have been many famous Unitarian Universalists. You might be surprised to see these names listed as famous UUs online. John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Benjamin Franklin is listed, Thomas Paine, P.T. Barnum. Charles Dickens was apparently a Unitarian Universalist. T.S. Eliot, Ray Bradbury, Isaac Newton, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Susan B. Anthony, Paul Newman, the great actor, was apparently a member of the UU. Rod Serling of The Twilight Zone, Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, Kurt Vonnegut, Florence Nightingale, and according to the website here, even Charles Darwin. I'll let the comments section folks actually haggle that one out. That ought to be interesting. couple of days ago, I had the opportunity to have a short conversation with the Reverend Rebecca Bour. She is a minister at the Unitarian Universalist Community Church of Santa Monica, California. And I was curious as to her input as a UU pastor, for lack of a better word, and asked her to spend a few minutes on the radio with us. Now, she couldn't be available tonight, so we actually spoke on Sunday. And I asked her kind of what her role was in the UU church.
My title is Reverend Rebecca Bour, and I'm the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Community Church of Santa Monica.
Okay, so we're actually having this conversation on a Sunday. And did you give a message this morning?
I sure did.
May I ask what the topic of the message was?
Yes. In my congregation, we work with a theme each month, which has been more prevalent in Unitarian Universalist congregations in the last few years. And our theme for March is brokenness. So the theme for the services this morning was brokenness in many different forms.
Well, if I may, don't give me the full sermon, but can you give me the Reader's Digest version? I'm trying to get a flavor for what the service might have been like this morning.
Absolutely. Brokenness is a real challenge, I think, for liberal religion because it can evoke feelings of a more fundamental or orthodox faith, one that perhaps if you were raised in a Judeo-Christian tradition, you might have been taught that humans come into this world as a result of original sin. And Unitarian Universalists rejected that theology a long time ago and instead put forth this notion, a little bit crazy, that we have inherent worth and dignity, that human beings actually come from what you might call original blessing. So we talked about that in the service, but if your eyes are open in this world, you will realize that people of inherent worth and dignity seem to make some bad choices and inflict a lot of harm and suffering on each other. So how do we reconcile that? A faith in goodness and the inherent worth and dignity of every person with the reality that we see that the world is broken and that we also have to face our own brokenness, and how can we do that together?
So let's say I came out of an Orthodox religion, which, by the way, I kind of did, or a fundamentalist religion, which did believe.
Yes, I heard that about you.
I came out of fundamentalist Christianity, which believes in original sin, right? I was born, and once I reach the age of accountability, I will be accountable for all of my sins and the responsibility I have to drop to my knees and ask for forgiveness in Jesus and all of that. So you're giving this kind of presentation this morning. Do you find there are people sitting in the audience who may have sort of wandered in from a fundamentalist church who might be hungry to hear that they weren't born sinful and dirty?
That's an interesting question. We have so many visitors here every Sunday, and I am so curious to hear their stories. I actually just walked out of a newcomer orientation with about, 25 or 30 people who were here for maybe not the first time this morning, but are new to the community, and they are sharing some of those stories. But I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that this is the first time it's occurred to them that what they learned as a young child or in a different faith tradition, that this is the first time they've heard an alternative. A lot of folks who find their way to a Unitarian Universalist congregation have been on an independent spiritual path for many, many years, have done a lot of exploring and religious seeking, and are now at a place in their lives where they want to do that with a community for a variety of different reasons. So certainly, I think there are people here every Sunday who grew up with a message like the one you grew up with, but I don't think this would be the first time they've ever heard an alternative to that message. Maybe
I misspoke. I think maybe they had heard it, but maybe they just were there for reinforcement, for encouragement. Maybe they were at a low point in their lives.
Oh, yes, that is true.
Yeah.
Yes, and I wasn't raised with that fundamentalist faith, but that message that there's goodness in the world, that it's worth, joining our hands and hearts together to be a part of repairing the world instead of further damage, I basically need to hear that at least once a week.
Rebecca, has there ever been an occasion where you've taken a holy book of some kind out and used it in a speech? Have you taken a Bible, a Quran, another book on stage and used it in some capacity?
I definitely draw on multiple different wisdom traditions. I did do my graduate studies at Harvard, but I am definitely not an expert in any of those traditions. So I actually find it easier or more resonant with my own spiritual life to not rely too much on sacred scriptures and instead go to a lot of secular sources. for instance, poetry or readings from a novel or a scene from a movie, those would be just as likely to be used in my sermon preparation.
How would you define spiritual in the context that you're speaking today? I mean, I occasionally will hear it when we're talking about the quote-unquote awe-inspiring or transcendent. Is that the context that you mean spiritual, or do you really believe we can tap into a spiritual plane?
I feel like I'm still on the path with a lot of those questions. And again, one of the things that I love about my job is being able to be in conversation with other people who relate spiritual experiences that are more in line with what you ended your question with there, where they have experienced a different kind of existence. For me personally, it's much more of a poetry or a metaphor or a reach in humankind for what is just beyond our grasp. I'm not sure if there's something more than what is, but I'm definitely part of want to investigate that and understand that more in my own life.
Sure, I don't mean it's like a gotcha question from the atheist, right? And I understand we're all sort of on a quest for what is true, what is real, what is right, what does the evidence support. And it's in that context that I mean the question. But when we say spiritual, so many people define it in different ways. And there are many people who just use that word to color something that takes their breath away, something that genuinely moves them down to their marrow. And it sounds like that may be the case for you as well?
Yes, definitely for me, the something beyond what I can otherwise grasp or understand or be a part of is one of my names for God or for spirit.
Do you use the name God in any context? God who created us? Is there any of that type of language?
There isn't, I would say. I'm always curious. What I say and what people hear is not always the same thing.
I know what that's like. I totally know what that's like, Rebecca.
But for me, the strong personification of God is not as helpful as, again, some of these more amorphous or metaphorical terms. It doesn't map well onto my experience. But I will say that I am very moved by a number of prayers or songs that do direct our attention towards that other. There's a hymn that we sing a lot here that's called Comfort Me, that just says, comfort me, sing with me, walk with me. And it doesn't say God or Lord or Spirit of Life, sing with me. It just says, sing with me. And so to me, that is a really, again, resonant expression of how the community could be walking with me, God could be walking with me, something beyond me in moments of great struggle could be walking with me. I don't spend a lot of time naming that, but I do name that need I have to be held and embraced by something larger than myself.
Many people who don't come from a church culture may not understand the draw, the attraction, the power of coming together as a quote-unquote body to enjoy communal music, to be inspired, to exchange ideas in that way. It's often why I will encourage free thought events in the non-believing community, because I think we are human beings, we are relational creatures, and we genuinely need each other. I think the challenge that I'm having when I talk to many people in the Unitarians, they seem... The word non-committal is really the only word I can come up with at the moment. It's very nebulous language that's always allowing for so much elbow room, And I think to myself, is there ever a time in your life, personally, is there ever a time in the culture of your church when someone just stands up and says, actually, this is false. This has been disproven. Is there ever a time that harder language is used in the UU culture? Could you speak to that for me?
That's a great question. I'm going to deviate slightly and I'm going to come back, but one of the texts I did use for the service today was a lecture from a Unitarian professor named James Luther Adams, who in 1941 was coming to the defense of liberal religion to say that it does have a strong commitment and it does have both the head and the heart are important. And he was kind of making a case in 1941 for some of what I'm hearing in your question, like, where do you stand, Unitarian Universalist? If everything is okay, then how are you going to draw the boundaries around your community? And I think that's a very lively question in the congregation I'm serving right now, that there's such a commitment to inclusiveness and welcome and to understanding where people are on their paths, that we don't do a good job of figuring out where the boundaries are or stating them clearly. So it kind of becomes a hidden culture in our congregation that for folks just get the sense of, oh, that's not welcome, or, oh, I just hit a nerve, or, oh, but it's unstated instead of being much more present.
Do you think in the UU culture that's because many people simply don't want to be hammered down? They don't want to nail themselves to a specific position. They don't want to be married to X. And so they just sort of speak nebulous language? Or do you think they genuinely fear saying something that will send people to the exits? They want everyone to feel welcome, and so therefore they believe they have a sort of an obligation to, I don't want to say water it down, but I got to say water it down a little bit so that people don't feel accosted. I mean, do you think it's a personal conviction thing, or do you think it's just we're trying to make sure the red carpet that we've rolled out for everyone is as wide as humanly possible?
I wonder if it's mostly column B, that again, this drive to be a force for welcome and inclusive community in a world where, again, the stereotype, this is probably not the lived experience of a lot of people, but the stereotype is that doors are slammed in your face all the time when you say, I'm an atheist, or you say, I don't believe in that part of this creed, but I do believe in this part. And so the fear of being outcast from a religious community is very real. And folks in Unitarian Universalist communities kind of carry that woundedness in some ways. But I think as I am growing in my own ministry and continuing to learn about this faith, I'm also curious about how we have been able to really teach and form people to have confidence in their own spiritual maturity. When you talk about conviction and commitment, part of what I hear is, wow, again, where do I stand? Where am I putting the limits around what I know and what I'm willing to defend? And I don't think Unitarian Universalism, in my experiences of it, has really said that that's important, that we grow more mature as spiritual beings and deepen our understanding of this faith. Part of the reluctance to take a stand would come from just not necessarily being that confident that you're ready to do that you've been formed by this faith and can now express what it means to you in a way that's meaningful and comes out of that deep sense of conviction and commitment.
You realize how it sounds to many of us, though. It sounds like you're always asking the questions, but you're never really settling on an answer. I think that's probably one of the main criticisms in my research for the show of the UU Church is, yeah, everybody's busy being curious, but no one's found a landing zone for this point or that point. For you, are you saying the journey is enough?
For me and where I am in my life right now, I feel like those questions are very lively for me.
Yeah.
That this is enough. This rich history, this incredible community that I'm a part of here and that I've experienced in other Unitarian Universalist churches. But as a faith tradition as a whole, it seems to be a very lively question. I think your research is right on.
What do you like most about the UU Church? I mean, come on, what rings your bell? What resonates with you? What do you carry around with you that really makes you happy you've joined this particular community?
The spiritual diversity of our congregation is pretty exciting to me, especially living in a place like Los Angeles where people just come from all sorts of different backgrounds. Originally that drew me in for a much more mundane expression of religious diversity. My husband was raised in a Reformed Jewish household, and I came from a culturally Christian background, and this was a home for us that didn't demand immediately that we give up various parts of our hybrid identities. It said, bring everything that's been important to you and add it to the mix, and there's a place for you here.
Does he still enjoy participating in sort of Jewish traditions? I know many people, even who step away from the more fundamental parts of the faith, actually enjoyed the more cultural and traditional parts that the religion brought to the table. Does he still practice any kind of Judaism?
He does, although in the context of our family's commitment to Unitarian Universalism. So, we will participate in, storytelling around different festivals in the year and light Shabbat candles at our home on Friday nights. But it's interesting to think about how Jewish that makes my family, since that also is a religious boundary that but different people can test in different ways.
Well, I don't know if it depends, I think, on your motivation. People will do it for a number of reasons. I think people enjoy certain traditions. Tradition colors our lives. Even as an atheist, I can totally understand that. And some people enjoy certain types of tradition. I think it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely part of our family's life as well, not just my professional life or the congregation that I'm serving.
Rebecca, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to share your perspective, and all my best up there at the Unitarian Universalist Community Church of Santa Monica, California. And maybe I'll get a chance to peek my head in the door one day and shake your hand in person, okay?
Oh, I hope you do. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Had a message in from Mary who said this about the UU church and culture. She said, I think people attending a Unitarian church are just people looking for community. Not a crazy, fantasy, imaginary being belief system, just a group of people that they can talk and share their lives with without being looked at or being looked down upon as heathens. Eric said, I think it's the first step on the road to atheism. Kitty says, I consider myself a UU and an atheist. I see it as a place where you can take your questions and ideas about life, God, and the greater good and find other people who want to openly discuss those ideas with you. It's about personal truths and personal paths, but also involves the community that a lot of spiritual or non-religious people can't easily find. Church provides more than just a place of worship. It provides a community, help, heart, fellowship, and loads of other things for a person's well-being. When you're a non-believer or have an alternative idea of faith, you don't fit into a church setting. You're outcast. With the UU fellowships, you're no longer outcast, and your deep philosophical questions won't get you asked to leave. Doris wrote in and said, my husband and I broke with our Pentecostal Christian upbringing in our early 20s. After that, we tended to call ourselves agnostics. I felt it was still reasonable to believe in a God creator, but the nature of that God was totally up in the air. After our children were born, we were comfortable with the idea of our kids saying nothing when asked, what are you? As in, what's your religion? Also, since our extended families were all still conservative Christian, we wanted to give our kids not only a sense of identity, but also some education about what all the religious fuss was about, as well as tools to counteract their evil influence. So we joined a UU congregation in our area. We made friends with other young families who were there for the same reason, or more often because theirs was an interfaith marriage and this was their compromise. Our religious education program taught the kids about all the major religions, but with emphasis on Jewish and Christian teachings, as well as humanism and UU history and teachings. It did not teach the kids what religious ideas to believe, but did teach about the principles we all agreed on, the worth of every person, democratic ideals, respect for the earth, etc. As a volunteer Sunday school teacher, I remember teaching my class to make little Muslim prayer rugs and showing them how to pray toward Mecca, and the next week making Jewish prayer shawls. We had annual Christmas parties with Santa, as well as an annual Seder, which, by the way, is a Jewish tradition. The services were mostly humanistic in substance, but Protestant Christian in style. We sang hymns, listened to a sermon, had a moment of meditation or prayer, even had a choir. John Lennon's Imagine is always a big hit. In some ways it was surreal, in other ways very comforting. I had the form of what I'd been brought up with, but without the pesky detail of not believing what they were saying, because really they weren't saying much except be a good person and act on your values. It tended to be very liberal, progressive, and there were lots of quotes from Gandhi and Martin Luther King. My kids had their own coming-of-age ceremony instead of confirmation or bar mitzvah, and they made lifelong friendships. Now that our kids are grown up, we're very ambivalent about remaining as members. In recent years, the UUs have become a bit more new agey, more spiritual for our taste. They call themselves a religion. We're pretty much convinced atheists now, and the services are hard to sit through. However, we made some wonderful friendships over the years. It really has become our community. We have few other friends, and so we're reluctant to sever ties with the organization. So we still drag ourselves to an occasional service, participate in the endless fundraisers, they're always on the brink of insolvency, and serve on the occasional committee. Sometimes I wish I could trade it in for one of those atheist meetings I've heard about, but I don't know if I want to start over with a whole new organization. The UU congregation definitely met a need for us. It was a wonderful bridge for us as we left our religious past to our atheist present, and it gave our kids a great way to learn about religion without being indoctrinated by one. But it was just that, a bridge. We and our kids have crossed over it. Doris, thank you very much for the message. Michael Werner is past president of the American Humanist Association. He's vice president of the Fellowship of Religious Humanists and president of the Unitarian Church of Charlotte. He has also been a critic of the UU Church in many ways. In fact, he's written a book called Regaining Balance, The Evolution of the UUA. Despite the fact that he's had a few challenges with his voice today, he has been kind enough to join us on the radio tonight. Michael, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Seth.
Tell me about the book. What's your angle here on the Unitarians?
My book is really designed because I'm trying to reach out to people to explain some phenomena that's happened in the Unitarian Universalism. I'm a longtime Unitarian Universalist, and it has given me so much, and especially it's where I learned humanism. It's where I started off learning about it. And also learning, I thought, a pretty good fashion of it, a deeper fashion of what it means to be a non-theist. My book is intended to explain what has happened regarding an association of churches. It's really not a denomination, it's an association of independent churches that started off in its long transition and evolution, focused on reason and religion. It was an evolutionary process. It started off with Unitarianism, where there was a belief in just one God, not three, but then morphed into saying, well, we don't believe in the Bible is absolute word of God. What's the grounding for our existence is, and for our faith is going to be our reason and religion. It eventually evolved in the latter part of the 19th century, where people are starting to take the evolutionary theories of Darwin seriously. And they said, well, we have to incorporate this into our whole worldview. They've always been on the progressive, pushing the edge front. The Unitarians were many of the leaders in the abolitionist movement. And when this started, then there was a debate within the Unitarian Church over theism versus non-theism. Eventually, a group in the Midwest called the Western Conference started up and presented a form of Unitarianism where it was non-theistic. It was using the functional aspects of religion, meaning ethics, community, support of each other, but none of the theological baggage. And they, in 1917, a minister in the Midwest, John Dietrich, called this, what he was preaching, humanism, using an old term, but recasting it in a non-theistic light. And this was a whole worldview. It was a Weltanschauung, but a way to inspire people to something beyond just atheism, trying to show that there was a new whole worldview that we were starting to put together. It eventually led to the whole 20th century of humanism taking over. And the American Humanist Association grew out of that. And all of these present-day secular groups grew out of that original concept. They kept the fire of secularism alive in the 20th century.
Mike, if I'm to play off the title of your book, Regaining Balance, you feel that the current state of the Unitarian Church or group is imbalanced at this measure?
Yes. the balance I was trying to explain was that there was a balance between the heart and mind, reason and compassion, that was always an advancing denomination. And in the 50s, actually, it was the fastest growing denomination in the United States. But it was focused on humanism. 85% of the people focused on humanism. Because of a lot of other cultural events, the neo-romanticism of the 70s and 80s and 90s, a lot of other things came into play where it was a more relativistic culture developed, and a radical pluralism took over, where humanists were still involved, but weren't the leaders of that. I thought that this represented a certain going back and not a moving forward. Humanism was advancing, but Unitarian Universalism, we all have to understand, does not have a creed that's based upon the concept of individual freedom of belief. That worked into this neo-romanticism of a radical pluralism, or an indiscriminate pluralism, one might term it. My book was trying to say that something was vitally lost there, and especially with the growth of the secular mind and demographics within our culture, they would have been perfectly positioned to provide community and ethical education to the new seculars. But in some cases, some of the congregations are still doing it quite well.
So is the argument that you're making here, Michael, that the Universalists should be just humanists? The relativism, the pluralism, the large tent in which everyone is welcome is actually distracting from what was a humanist congregation?
Well, there's 7 principles to Unitarian Universalism, and one of them is the responsible search for truth and meaning. There's always going to be a tension between a pluralistic group and trying to advance education and knowledge. And I think that balance is skewed too much so far in the vein of radical pluralism.
We're talking about kind of a touchy-feely kind of a thing over the facts. I'm reaching a little bit because I want to understand, but
no, some congregations are that way. And one of the jokes is, if you've seen one Unitarian congregation, you've seen one. There are some there are congregations that are quite woo-woo, and then there's others that are totally humanist to this day. And most of them actually are in between. Certainly, all the congregations tend to be humanistic, if you know what I'm saying, in terms of being focused on human values, human worth and dignity, and social action, which is a good thing. The question is, are we losing something by not focusing as well on the responsible search for truth and meaning?
You speak to one of the challenges I had in preparing for this broadcast. It's like every church was a different letter in the same alphabet. I mean, they all call themselves Universalist in some capacity, but they were just so wildly different. Everybody is doing a different interpretive dance to the Unitarian song, so to speak.
Exactly. And that's a good thing. But, of course, as a humanist, I'm more interested in advancing humanism in one fashion or another. If it's been evolving, my own thought is that it should evolve at this point. Just say, it's time to give up. We gave up slavery. We gave up sexism. It's time to give up God and move on and develop a pluralistic humanist culture within the Unitarian Universalism, if it's going to be truly an evolving tradition. If you can't move beyond that, well, then there's going to be problems for the future credibility and growth of the organization.
Does every seat at the table deserve to be at the table? Does it have merit to allow any and all perspectives in just because they are perspectives? Do you want to speak to that, Mike?
That's an interesting problem we have within Unitarian Universalism. If you look at each congregation, no one tells anyone to leave. People leave because their needs aren't being met. If you get a ministry in there that's just preaching a hardcore humanism, and we've got many, atheism, and just coming out, even anti-theist rhetoric, the normally religious theists, they're just not going to feel comfortable. In my own case, I'm not comfortable in certain congregations where they use a lot of religious language. And so that I'm going to walk with my feet. And that's what a lot of Unitarian Universalist humanists have done. The drop-off has been marked because of some of these changes. One of the big changes that's happened is what's called the language of reverence, where the language of reverence involves using traditional religious language in non-theistic terms. In other words, you could use God for anything that you want. God might mean, like in Paul Tillich's philosophy, that which is ultimately important to us. I can certainly understand that, and that has bearing on my own life. But 95% of people know that God is a word that has supernatural foundations. That's what it's based upon. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous. I know it tries to bring people together, but it also, in one sense or another, marginalizes the humanists within these congregations.
I was invited to speak. Well, tentatively, I was invited to speak at a Unitarian Universalist Sunday morning meeting. But before that day, they had asked me, will you be derogatory towards religious belief? And we want to sort of take your temperature to make sure that you're not going to come in here and be too hard on religion. And I found that was kind of a revealing conversation, because in my mind, I think it either is factual, supported by the evidence, or it is not. And so if you are in sort of a relativist environment, how can truth genuinely matter? Exactly.
Self-censorship is the worst form of censorship amongst liberals. And so we have to be careful of that. When we're trying to be all things to all people, when we're trying to not offend other people's opinions and feelings, then we start censoring ourselves. And growth is impossible in that kind of environment.
Do you still attend a humanist fellowship in any way?
I don't. The congregation I was up in Chicago was a strongly humanist congregation. They have recently gotten a couple ministers that are more what's called process theology. And it's where you're using God as a metaphor, etc. So I can see it changing rapidly. The church that I'm closest to in Wilmington, I just can't stomach the woo-woo crap. And so, I didn't leave Unitarian Universalism. It left me.
Wow.
Now, I am in daily contact on the internet, everything, with a lot of different Unitarian Universalists. What's sad to me, Seth, is that the new atheists have no idea of the depths of what was going on when ministers were preaching humanism, a hard humanism, every week. They had a congregation that was deeply knowledgeable about it, and not just anti-theists. It was, okay, how do we actually live our lives as secularists? And so some of the most beautiful writing and thoughts and depth of understanding of what it means to be a non-theist really were during that period. And we've lost something. When you look at the bloggers, the tweets and things like that, you can't get an in-depth understanding. To me, atheism is what I don't believe. Humanism is what I do believe. But more important, it's those ideals, those binding ideals that generate who I am and make for a better society.
Michael, thanks for your perspective on the radio today. It's been great to have you as a guest.
Thank you.
It was in the summer of 2011 that a Unitarian church opened its doors and welcomed an atheist event. The first ever Oklahoma Free Thought Convention took place at All Souls Unitarian Church, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Go figure. And that day was the very first day I ever showed my face as an atheist activist. Before then, for 2 years, I was sort of crawling my way out of this thick religious culture, terrified I was going to lose my family, lose my job. I didn't know what I was doing, but the thinking atheist community still allowed me a chance to have the conversations and to have a sense of support and community and to be a part of the argument out there, And so I sort of hid behind the icon, but people only knew my voice and the symbol, the thinking atheist symbol, which, by the way, doesn't represent any single person. The thinking atheist symbol just emphasizes the importance of rejecting faith and thinking honestly about the challenges and the opportunities that you and I face. And in that regard, and with those memories of 2011, I have a bit of a soft spot for the Unitarians. Their inclusiveness, their welcome mat received us and our unpopular opinions without any judgment. And we all know that judgment is something churches are often very, very guilty of. I totally get the importance of community. And while there are some people, a minority I think, but there are some people who actually do thrive on their own, they're better, or at least more comfortable independently, I am convinced that human beings have evolved to crave a sense of community. I know how I feel personally when I'm in a room with people who I enjoy, who enjoy me, who challenge me, to feel those bonds of connection and friendship, to smile and say, look, I've missed you. How you been? What's going on in your life? Do you need anything? Life, when it is shared, sort of takes on this whole new flavor. And through words and actions, you and I create and strengthen relational bonds and bring genuine goodness to each other's lives. The UU Church provides a place for this, and I really appreciate that. I really genuinely do. I love the idea of having a forum for ideas. A place that is not constructed upon an attitude of exclusion. Just another tribalistic church club, claiming superiority over all the other tribalistic church clubs. The UU Church welcomes the strong and the wounded, the educated and the ignorant, the vast rainbow of humanity outside its doors. It says, come on in. And in that sense, the Unitarians may be doing church better than most churches. When they say, come as you are, they actually mean it. I also totally understand that many enjoy the structure of church. I was talking to Dr. Robert Price, who used to be a Christian minister, and he still attends church from time to time just because he enjoys. He doesn't go in because he genuinely believes it. He goes in because he enjoys the atmosphere and sort of the tradition of doing it. And while he might sing a Christian hymn and he might listen to a Christian sermon, he doesn't listen to it as truth with a capital T. He goes to participate in an experience, and that is rewarding for him, and I understand it. And a great many people enjoy the structure of the church, the traditions, the formats of the services, the messages, the music. For many, it sort of fills a void that was left when they walked away from the fundamentalist churches of their past. They don't miss all the dogma, but they have always missed looking forward to some inspiration and connection on a Sunday morning. And they get this in the Unitarian Church. I really do appreciate their stand for human rights issues, the rights of non-heterosexuals, the rights and opportunities for women inside the church and outside of the church, which is, by the way, something that Catholics could learn a thing or two from. I like the humanistic themes. I like the compassion of the UU Church. I think it does meet a need for community support, humanitarian work, and important discussions about important ideas. But, and you probably knew this was coming, when it comes to the definition of important ideas and language about pursuing one's own truth, that kind of terminology, and the terms we heard so often, even on the show tonight, stuff about personal journeys and asking questions and curiosity and seeking the truth, this may be the point where I part ways with the Unitarian Universalists. There's a documentary out there that features a series of debates between atheist Christopher Hitchens and Christian pastor Douglas Wilson. The documentary is a great one. It's called Collision. And in the film, they were talking about the concept of having an open mind and how an open mind is actually meant to close on something. It's like the old saying, don't have such an open mind that your brain falls out, right? That kind of thing. It is good to be receptive to new information, ready to examine it, and to occasionally reassess older information. I totally get it. But when you and I are confronted with overwhelming evidence that something is either true or not true, this is factual, this is not factual, the mind should be ready to close and say, you know what, I can, at least for now, walk away from this, and I can pursue other, more productive lines of inquiry. This does not mean that we permanently shut off our minds, right? We can be reopened if and when new reasons for examination are offered up and the new evidence is presented. But until that time, the ideas which have been demonstrably debunked or have never been proven true beyond conflicting personal experience claims and that kind of thing, well, those can be set aside so we can focus our energies instead on more productive things. To be able to do this, then, we have to be prepared to say out loud and with conviction, this over here is almost certainly false. There's no evidence to support this claim. There is, in fact, overwhelming evidence to refute this claim. It simply isn't true as we weigh it against the evidence. When looking at so many claims of so many religions and belief systems, when those claims are scrutinized under the white-hot light of the scientific method, we can and we have come to a point where we can say there's simply no evidence for this. There's simply no evidence to support that. And there's overwhelming evidence against it. As Robert Green Ingersoll once said, we have to be prepared to destroy the false because then we make more room to accommodate the true. I'm paraphrasing there. And this requires that we close some doors on antiquated and even ridiculous, possibly unproductive and damaging ideas. We put them away, we set them behind us, and we commit ourselves instead to the ideas, the beliefs, propositions, opinions, and purposes which are supported by the evidence, or at the very least haven't been clearly refuted as untrue. How can we embrace the true, or what is evidently true, if our main focus is to be all-inclusive? How can you and I, as human beings, genuinely pursue truth if we're unprepared to define it out of fairness? Are we so nervous about appearing non-inclusive that we reduce ourselves to a social club which talks about the truth without ever stepping up and standing upon it? Of what merit are the questions if we're so gun-shy about actually finding and proclaiming answers? Not in a dogmatic way, not in an absolute way, but in a scientific way. We embrace the fact of evolution, right? We embrace it based on the overwhelming evidence for it. And embracing evolution helps us to be more effective in educating ourselves and our children and in the understanding of our lives and our world. So if somebody walks in the door and they have an anti-scientific position on the evolution of life, are we doing them or ourselves a favor by giving them equal time on the playing field? Or are we just wasting time, valuable time, and actually cultivating ignorance in the name of inclusion? This is my challenge. And while I really do support the UU Church, I really do enjoy its sense of community. I love the idea about educating about what other religions believe, understanding what does this culture think and believe, what does the other culture think and believe. That type of education I think is critical out there. I also, though, feel it necessary to encourage those who are leading Unitarian congregations that the facts don't really care how we or the congregation feels about them. The facts don't change because we've been endowed with a different spiritual truth or personal revelation. I just don't believe that. I don't see that. A fact is a fact. The facts are not prisoners of our own subjective perceptions. And if we're genuinely interested in living truthful lives, the facts matter. And that means we have to separate supported claims from the unsupported claims, the facts from the fictions, the truths from the untruths. And we have to be prepared to take some hard stands, to even close our minds, even temporarily, to unproductive and often ridiculous lines of reasoning and unsubstantiated claims. And we have to embrace the idea that true humanism means finding real solutions for real reasons in the real world based on real evidence. And as we remain forever curious out there, we're always asking questions, we also remain unafraid to stand in the shadow of overwhelming evidence and embrace the answers when they come. Thank you so much for listening to the broadcast tonight. Next Tuesday's show is called For Goodness Sake, including my special guest, Dr. Michael Shermer, and his new book, The Moral Arc, Dale McGowan, and Jonathan Figdor of Stanford University. Going to be a great broadcast next Tuesday night. Now that the show's over this evening, don't forget to log on to naturebox.com/thinkingatheist and sign up for your free sampler box of great tasting and wholesome snacks, stuff like sweet blueberry almonds, and so much more. Log on, check them out, and fill up your online pantry tonight. naturebox.com/thinkingatheist.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.